You're listening to the Fanalist Podcast. Follow on Twitter at TheFanalystPod.
This Saturday, it's UFC 199, Rockhold versus Bisping. Tyson, what fights are you really looking at on this card?
Well, the card took a bit of a tumble when Chris Weidman had to take himself off the card due to neck injury, but overall, it's still an awesome one to look forward to. And ever since this card was announced, I've been really looking forward to it as one of the top pay-per-views for 2016. One of the fights that I'm looking at is Strickland versus Breeze. This isn't on the main card, and I think it'll be a little underlooked, but it's between two top-tier talents that are easily, in my opinion, the best prospects in the UFC right now. Breeze trains at TriStar Gym in Montreal alongside George St. Pierre and Rory McDonald, and they both said that this kid has enormous potential. He's 24, 3-0 in the UFC thus far. He looks amazing. Strickland, also really young, has great potential in the welterweight division. He holds a 4-1 record, 17-1 overall though. A great grappling skills. I think stylistically I give the advantage to Breeze just because on the feet he looks great, and overall I love this fight because the winner of this fight will establish himself as being the top prospect and has a great future in the welterweight division. It's hard to see either one of them not getting a title shot in 2-3 years.
Why do you think they left this one off the main card?
It's kind of weird what the UFC is doing in a way, but I get it because the internet has proven to be the platform right now that's rising the most. So they're trying to promote their subscription-based website, UFC Fight Pass. It's got all the preliminary fights for pay-per-view cards. And this is a fight that I think will gain a lot of viewership for Breeze and Strickland, who don't have a lot of recognition right now. Not a whole lot of people know who they are, being prospects. So I think it's a good way to sort of promote both the website and these fighters in general. So next on my card is Poirier versus Green. This is on the main card. Poirier, ever since he moved up to the lightweight division, looks like a straight-on killer. He's one of the most talented fighters. Each fight, he seems like he's shown visible improvements, both standing up and on the ground. His fight against Joe Duffy in January, he looked like a straight-on savage. I love the way he's looked at 155. 145 just didn't seem like the right weight for him. It was too much of a cut. When he lost to McGregor back in 2014, I think it was a wake-up call for him. He realized that 155 is definitely his home. Green, coming off a year-and-a-half-long layoff, it's going to be tough. We've seen cage rust before. After his last fight, he had an 8-fight win streak, so it's hard not to see him coming back from this layoff as another top contender like he was before, but I think Poirier will just be too much. I think stylistically, I think Poirier just overall is the better fighter. He has the ability to knock people out early. If it goes longer, I still have Poirier as the favorite.
Now, if our listeners can't tell, you're the MMA expert. I'm a new fan of the sport, and I really like the MMA. I find that the level of competition is stellar. My question to you is, how do you feel about all these fighters who have been cutting to make a lower division? Now, suddenly, it seems like is that a trend that more are realizing, I just can't fight at that unhealthy weight. I need to come back up, and I need to train there and fight these guys?
100%. And the IV ban that the UFC put in place back in October last year definitely made it more difficult for these fighters to make that weight cut. A lot of them relied on the IV to get them rehydrated for the fight. I mean, weight cut has always been difficult for these fighters. It's never been an easy thing to do, even with the IV. So when we saw McGregor fight against Diaz at 170 pounds, he said, "This is the best I've felt in my life. I feel like this is the most natural weight for me." He didn't have to cut anything. And I think most fighters are realizing that maybe that's the way to go to. It's kind of stupid, the fact that we have to cut weight, because at the end of the day, if we're all cutting weight, we're all the same size. So there isn't really a big advantage. Maybe for some there is, but it's becoming a thing of the past now, and it's definitely becoming a trend for sure.
Yeah, I feel like, when you're preparing for a fight, there's so much going through your mind already, and now you're kind of throwing yourself off, your concentration, your health, and just in general. You're probably taking years off the end of your life when you're going up and down, that severely through weight classes, during during your 20s and 30s. I just feel like that's way too hard on the body. And I'm not the first person to think that. Obviously, the MMA's realized this, and that's why they've changed the rules with the IVs. They don't want fighters doing this. And, after seeing, I saw quite a few guys fighting at a very unnatural weight for themselves, and watching it, I almost felt guilty. I felt like, how can I enjoy watching these guys that look like they're torturing their bodies in order to play a sport? That's something it's really hard to be a fan of, but seeing these guys look healthy, seeing Conor in that last fight against Diaz, I mean, obviously the outcome wasn't what he expected, and nor was it what fans expected, but he was fighting at a comfortable weight, and when he comes back to fight Diaz eventually, he's going to be comfortable again, and it's just one less thing to worry about.
Absolutely, and a lot of people are expecting him to go back to 145, and I just don't see a reason why you should. Obviously, to defend your belt against Frankie Edgar is what a lot of people believe he should do. But if the weight cut just isn't right for him and he doesn't like doing it, I don't see a reason to do it. The next fight I have on my card is the third to the main event. It's Holloway versus Lamas. It's a fight that I look forward to, but at the same time, it's kind of like, how many more fights can we give Holloway before he finally gets that title shot? And with McGregor kind of making it difficult on the division, not defending his belt and having a rematch with Diaz, prolonging the whole process, and now Edgar versus Aldo for interim belt. It just seems like Holloway is getting the worst possible luck in all of this. But at the end of the day, he still wants to fight. He still wants to get that title shot. So he's coming off of 8 straight wins. And honestly, if Conor doesn't get back down, it's hard not to see him getting the winner of Edgar Aldo if he wins this one. And honestly, I see him as the overall favorite in this. He proved against Jeremy Stephens that even with a guy with tremendous power, he can stand up with him and trade shots. It seems like he's improved fight after fight. His win against Cum Swanson was his coming out party. People started looking at him as a legitimate contender. And after this fight, I believe that he will win. I think it's hard to not acknowledge him as the best fighter at 145 other than the top 3.
Now, Max Holloway, this guy just lands a ton of significant strikes. How do you see him coming at this fight? Do you think he's going for the knockout? Is that how he wins fights?
I think that's what he knows that he needs to do in order to establish himself as the fighter to fight for the title. Although his win against Jeremy Stephens was a big one, and I thought he did very well in it, it wasn't like it was a decision at the end of the day. It was a decision, and not a whole lot of people really remember it. He wants a memorable win here, like he had against Cub Swanson just last year. Lamas is a tough guy, though. I think a lot of people sort of underestimate him. A lot of people kind of overlook him in the featherweight division. After his loss against Mendez, it seemed like he may have been down and out, but he goes against a guy like Sanchez, stands up with him, and looks like a savage against a guy who's a much bigger 45er than he is. So it's not like this is going to be go in there and absolutely demolish Ricardo Lamas, because I think this fight could easily go to a decision, just because Lamas is a tough fighter and tough to put out, really. I mean, Mendez is a hard striker. Holloway isn't really known for having that power. He's more of a guy who just kind of grinds you out, using his well-rounded attributes both on the ground and on the feet. I like Max Holloway's chances of finishing this fight. I honestly do. It kind of sounds weird, like I'm contradicting myself here, but I think Max is going in there with that killer instinct, knowing that a win, like a knockout or a submission, will just grant him that title shot.
Well, I mean, the Vegas odds are in his favor, 3.5 to 1. Those are going to be the chances that he probably, and I think we both agree on this, probably gets his chance at a title shot in his next fight.
My next fight on the card is the co-main event, Cruz versus Faber 3. It's tough to get excited for this one for me, just because it seems like this one over the years it just needs to end. The rubber match just has to happen, and finally it's here. It's at maybe the worst possible time for Uriah Faber, although he's coming off a win, and he still does look strong as a 135er. It's not the same Uriah Faber as old, and this Dominic Cruz, I had a few doubts about him coming in against Dillashaw after a year-long layoff and the 3-year-long layoff he had before that due to injuries. I thought Dillashaw would have his way with him once it came to the later rounds, and he did win round 4 and 5. But the first 3 rounds, Dominic Cruz looked fantastic, and he proved that he is as great of a fighter as he was before, maybe even better defender than he was before. And it's hard to see a guy like Uriah Faber go in against Dominic Cruz and have the same success that he was able to in the first 2 fights. The first fight he won, The second fight he lost to by decision, but it was a pretty close fight. It was a very competitive fight. This one, I just can't see it being that way. This is the one fight on the card where I'm kind of going, well, I see a very clear winner in this one, and I see a very clear loser in this one. And unfortunately, for Uriah Faber, the gritty veteran that he is, this could be his very last fight in mixed martial arts, but I like Cruz's chances in this one.
Cruz is the second biggest favorite on this card, and one of his specialties is being able to avoid the takedowns. His takedown defense is at an elite number. Do you think that he's just going to be able to stay on his feet and completely dominate Faber in every way?
I really do. Faber is a good wrestler, and in their second fight, and in the first fight as well, he was able to take Dominic Cruz down a few times, and he was actually able to knock Cruz down. But I think with the knowledge that Cruz has gained and the experience that he's gained as well, I mean, outside the octagon, a lot of fighters they sort of lose touch with the octagon and sort of the feel of being a fighter. With Cruz, it was almost like the opposite. Like, he gained more knowledge and experience being outside of the cage, sort of looking at it from like a secondhand point of view rather than the firsthand that he's been so accustomed to over his career. So I think with that improvement in knowledge and also in experience, it's just going to be too much for Faber to overcome. And Dillashaw is definitely the tougher fight than Faber is, and Cruz looked great against Dillashaw. He was able to avoid the takedowns. He was actually able to take Dillashaw down as well 2 times in a row. So the idea that he's able to do that, and he's not even known as an elite wrestler, just adds to his stamina.
Now for the main event, Luke Rockhold and Michael Bisping. Vegas has Rockhold as a big favorite.
No surprise there, no surprise whatsoever. This is a fight taken on 2 weeks' notice. The first fight happened back in 2014 where Rockhold was able to get a one-arm guillotine. And up to that point in the fight, it was a pretty competitive one. It wasn't like Rockhold was overwhelming Bisping by any means, but you could clearly see who was the better fighter in that one. And since then, Rockhold has looked like a stud. He's looked absolutely impeccable. His win against Weidman, one of the best middleweight performances that I think I've ever seen in a title fight. And that's talking in a division that had Anderson Silva, arguably the greatest of all time. And Rockhold being the giant 185er that he is, and Bisping taking this fight on short notice, I just can't see a scenario where Bisping is able to finish Rockhold, and that's the only way it's going to happen. And he knows that too. He's been saying that as well. He knows that if he's going to win this fight, he's got to take out Rockhold early. Otherwise, Rockhold's just going to ride the waves and just take complete control of him in the later rounds. I don't even think it'll go the later rounds. I think I see Rockhold being able to submit Bisping in the second round.
Well, we saw this happen with Diaz and McGregor. We saw one of these fights where somebody took it on short notice, and then it kind of threw off the heavy favorite. By the way you sound, you don't see Bisping, really competing or winning this one. But do you think the UFC actually made the right decision by giving Bisping this fight, or do you think there was somebody more worthy of getting this chance against Rockhold?
100% it should have been Bisping. Jacare was the second one, which I don't even agree with. He just came off a win against Vitor Belfort just a few weeks ago at UFC 198. Luckily for Bisping, declined the fight just because of an injury that he was dealing with. So Bisping, being the veteran that he has been and not getting a title shot to this point in his career, it just seemed right. Obviously, it's not the right circumstances for him. He would much rather have a full camp, but he's definitely the most deserving of this one, especially coming off a win against Anderson Silva. Like I said, arguably the greatest of all time. If that doesn't earn you a title shot, I don't really know what should. I like to see a guy like Bisping, a gritty veteran that he is, a guy, a journeyman of sorts. I like him finally getting that title shot. But like you made the Diaz-McGregor comparison, it's just not the same scenario because Diaz was the bigger fighter in that. He didn't have to cut any weight. Obviously, McGregor didn't as well, but Diaz has a much bigger frame. He fights at 55. McGregor fights at 45. These are both guys in the 185 division. And Rockhold, stylistically, is a better fighter than Bisping is. That's just the bottom line. He proved that in the first fight. McGregor and Diaz, they didn't have a first fight, so it was kind of hard to sort of distinguish whether McGregor could hang with Diaz in his boxing, and he was in the first round. But obviously, when Diaz warmed up, we saw that just wasn't the case.
We will be back in a couple weeks to discuss more UFC. And of course, as we're working our way up to July 9th, where UFC 200 is going to feature Cormier and Jones, we'll be talking about that for sure in our next episode, as well as some of the other fights that will be taking place before UFC 200.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning into the Fanalist Podcast. I'm Tyson, and you can follow us at TheFanalystPod.